Hello and welcome to The Stack. For this week's show, I speak with the editor of celebrated wine magazine Decanter. Plus, the best stationery from Japan and our brand new café and shop in Paris is open with a nice selection of French and international titles too. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show talking about wine. In print, of course. This is not the menu. Decanter is Europe's best-selling wine magazine, read in over 100 countries, and they are celebrating half a century this year. It was a pleasure talking to the magazine's editor, Amy Wislocki, about their new issue, the importance of events for Decanter, and a few wine tips, of course.
This year is our 50th birthday, founded in 1975. And in fact, when it was started, no one really kind of liked the name, but it's stuck and it's still called Decanter after all this time.
And the wine industry itself have changed so much throughout the years. I mean, newer regions, and I think that's something that, I read Decanter. Of course, you have Bordeaux, regions that everybody knows and like, but I find it very exciting that there's always new areas that the magazine is trying to explore in a way.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many new and exciting regions now that weren't really on the radar at all back then, and even wine styles, so if you think of something like orange wine, that didn't really exist back then. Although obviously it originated from Georgia and it was the ancient kind of amphora wines, but in its current modern form, it wasn't really being made anywhere else. And so much is changing, and for so many reasons, and partly actually climate change. Climate change is forcing producers to explore new grape varieties, plant at altitude, and just consider things that they wouldn't have thought of before. So yeah, there's so much changing.
And there is the matter of taste. Is it true that I've read that people are preferring to drink wine with a lower alcohol content as well? There's been kind of some changes in that as well, right?
So there's definitely a big shift towards, people are looking at the alcohol level on the bottles. I mean, arguably, if a wine is balanced, then sometimes you shouldn't be able to taste the alcohol. It shouldn't stick out. But I think for health reasons maybe, or, people are choosing lower alcohol wines. And of course, it's kind of a double whammy because now here in the UK, we've got these new duty laws that have been introduced. And basically, the government is penalising the higher alcohol wines. So, the higher in alcohol the wine is, the higher the rate of duty that's being charged. So suddenly you'll see an increase on your kind of supermarket shelves of wines at kind of 11.5% and under, which is quite a change if you're used to drinking, a lot of wines on the shelves at the moment are like 13, 14%.
That's very interesting.
Quite a shift.
Let's go back, to the beginnings of Decanter. So it is a British publication, right?
It's a British, it started in Britain, it's based in Britain, but we're read in kind of 100 countries around the world. But yeah, I think it's seen very much as kind of a British European title. It was started by these two guys, very different from each other. Colin Parnell, who's a very kind of intellectual, bookish Englishman. And at the time, he was editor of a trade magazine called Wine and Spirit. And his deputy, Tony Lord. So they worked together and they kind of spotted a gap in the market for a consumer wine magazine, something to kind of celebrate the love of wine. And they didn't have any money to do it, so they kind of looked for funding, and they managed to get funding for the first 3 issues from Louis Gordon, who is they were importing Domecq sherry into the UK at the time. So he paid for the first 3 issues to be produced, and that was kind of the beginnings of Decanter, but it was very low budget. And my former publishing director, she worked there since the mid-80s, and so she had lots of memories, and she remembers, in the early days that they weren't allowed to make phone calls until after 1 o'clock when it was cheaper and, all this stuff.
and you worked for Decanter for quite a while now as well, right?
25 years.
Were you always involved with wine somehow? Or when you started at Decanter, that was kind of a new world to you?
So when I graduated, I went into magazines, into publishing, but not wine magazines. So at first I was at a business-to-business publisher, and then I went to Redwood, which was a customer magazine company. in its kind of heyday in the mid to late 90s. So I was editing a quarterly customer magazine for BT that they sent to their SME business customers. And I just decided that I needed to do something kind of more challenging. And, I was only 27 and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Wine was my passion, so I wanted to combine the two. I'd always loved wine and I'd done a couple of qualifications in my spare time. And, managed to land kind of my dream job, really.
And it is a fantastic magazine. And I have to say, I like the kind of the glossy feel of it. I love the supplements. I think this is so important. I think there's definitely a space still very much for Decanter in the newsstand.
Yeah, totally. And, it is a subject that people like to dream, don't they? It's not just about, obviously people are buying it mainly to find out what wines they should be drinking. But at the same time, I think people want to kind of live the lifestyle, and you look at the pictures of the vineyards and read about travelling in the wine regions. And, most of our readers are holidaying in wine regions, and, it's about kind of living the dream, isn't it? And there is that kind of aspirational feel as well.
Absolutely. And before we started the interview, I had to say, listen, I'm not a wine connoisseur. And you said you hear this a lot, but who is the reader of Decanter? Is it someone like me who likes to say, I'm not a wine connoisseur, or someone who definitely has a big collection at home, or perhaps both? Both of them are readers. Right?
I'd say both. There's a real spectrum, and obviously, our kind of core kind of traditional readership are very much the kind of the connoisseurs, and many of them will have kind of large cellars at home, and we're very much kind of still more male than female, although, that is kind of shifting. Probably more would be over 45, but gradually we're seeing a shift there as well. Well educated, kind of a lot of them kind of high net worth individuals, and they are spending a lot of money on wine, and a lot of them kind of like the classic regions, Bordeaux, Burgundy, Rhone, those Tuscany, Piedmont, the famous regions, and they're laying wine down a lot of the time as well as buying wine for everyday drinking. But, at the same time, also we do have 20% trade readership. That's important to kind of remember, although it is first and foremost a consumer magazine. And when we plan it, when we commission, we do so with the consumer readership in mind. But yeah, we do have a sizable trade readership as well. But no, what I was going to say was, alongside the connoisseurs, you do have the people who aren't so far along their journey of wine discovery, and they're still learning. And so we're trying to kind of cater for both of those audiences. And like many magazines, and we're trying to kind of broaden our appeal to a younger demographic without alienating the core readership. So it's always like a balancing act, really.
Yeah, it's always challenging to balance that. What about, this is a very special year for Decanter, passionate about wine since 1975. It's here written in the cover. Are you preparing special editions or events, or how do you see the rest of the year?
We will.
Decanter?
Obviously, we're proud of the fact that it's our 50th year, and we will mark it in the magazine. I think in the autumn we're going to do that, and we also have the Decanter World Wine Awards, which didn't exist until 2004 was the first year. And that now is the world's largest wine competition. So we have about 250 judges coming from all over the world to judge the wines we judge at Excel. It's a massive logistical operation. We get 18,000 wines entered. So during that week, we always have a judges' party. And it's a really great opportunity for everybody, everybody catches up with people that they haven't seen for ages. So obviously this year it will be kind of an extra special party, and we will kind of mark the 50th at that judges' party.
What about that area, especially for a wine magazine, that area of events, how important it is for the brand? Massively
important, In terms of revenue, the awards is the main kind of revenue stream. But our events division is really important. And I think most recent kind of figures I heard were, we have 3 main events that we put on each year at the moment. So we have a New York Fine Wine Encounter, we have a London Fine Wine Encounter in November, and a Singapore Fine Wine Encounter. The first one was last year. We're doing it again this year. And, it's a consumer event, and I think we have about 4,000 people a year come to them, and we have really top quality people coming to pour. So we have producers coming to pour their wine in the main tasting. And the idea is that we encourage the producers themselves to actually come along and pour the wine. So often it's the owner or the winemaker, so they'll be able to answer people's questions who are going around, and they're often amazed by the level of knowledge that people have and the interest that people have, And then we have masterclasses. So typically we'd have like 3 a day at the event. And they will be, top tier. When we had did an event in Shanghai, and I think it was 10 years ago, and we had all 5 Bordeaux first growths there. And, this is the kind of level of quality that you're talking about.
And coming back, you mentioned Shanghai, but I was looking at some of the statistics for Decanter. Sure, it is a British publication, but your market in the US is massive.
Yeah.
It's huge.
And it's a really important market for us as well. And we want to grow in the US. In particular, I think through, we have Decanter Premium, which is a paywall. So, we'd kind of like to grow our presence digitally because, obviously we want to grow in print as well, but we don't print the magazine in the States. So it has to be shipped over. So there is a delay, obviously. There are, obviously definitely exciting opportunities digitally in the States in particular, and with the events. And I think a lot of the US readers, I think they value Decanter. I think they see Decanter as kind of reflecting more the European palette as opposed to what sometimes, called the US, the American palette. So I think if people consider themselves to be more aligned with that, then they will perhaps read Decanter. And because we're covering wines from all over the world.
You really are. And as I said, the supplements are very important every time, especially the Italian editions, because I love Italian wine.
Who doesn't?
Who doesn't, right?
Italian wine and Italian food.
I was going to ask, actually, what do you drink? Do you have a favorite wine, a favorite type? Because I told you again, I'm not an expert, but I discovered I love dry Italian reds. That's what I like.
Well, and they're such great food wines as well, dry Italian reds. But yeah, in terms of dry Italian red, I love, I don't know if you've ever tried the red wines from Etna made from Nerello Mascalese. So the grape is called Nerello Mascalese, and it's grown, on the kind of volcanic slopes of Etna, and those wines can be incredible. I definitely recommend trying those. And in general, I it's like people always say, what's your favourite wine? And I can't answer that. It's just because I've got so many, and it depends what mood I'm in. But in general, it's more like a type of wine that I like. So sometimes I love big, bold, kind of oaky Chardonnays or something like that if I'm in the mood, or a kind of, really big, smooth red. But usually the wines I gravitate towards are the kind of fresher styles, and, wines that they have to be balanced. And I like wines that speak of where they come from. So I like, wines made from indigenous grape varieties. So I love like Greek wine. There's an amazing red grape variety called Zina Mavro, which is another grape I would definitely recommend that you try. And, if I see like a Sauvignon Blanc from Greece or a Chardonnay from Greece, I'm not saying they can't be good, but I'm not as interested as if it's a Greek wine made from native Greek varieties.
And the latest Decanter that is out now, the February edition, is Icons of Spain, 10 wines to try before you die. I love the drama already in the cover. Spanish wine, there's a market that I don't know very well, but I'm very keen to read actually those articles here.
It is, it's improved so much, over the last kind of 10, 20 years. And lots of people, they think of Spain, they just think of Rioja. But there's so much more than Rioja, or you might think of sherry as well. Even sherry, has such a kind of tired image, but sherry can be amazing, and I'd just recommend, having a look. And there's such a variety of styles and grapes to try. And, we've got, the wines to try before you die, they are the kind of famous Spanish red wines. Some of them are very expensive. And that's why, I think we said in the intro, even if you have to club together with your friends to try a bottle of this, try and do it. They're not all massively expensive, but a few of them are. But then, in the same issue, we've got a tasting of 110 Tempranillos under £15. So, we are kind of, again, the balance. We are kind of trying to cover the spectrum of things.
And you are a consumer magazine, but I love, perhaps that's quite a bit tradie, which I love, that you tell where can you actually find the bottles of wine. That's so helpful. I remember actually reading Decanter. There was one, I think it was a Nobili, the Montepulciano, that you could only find in Sainsbury's for some reason. But thanks to Decanter, I managed to find out.
Yeah, that is a massive amount of work to list the prices and stockists. Some people would argue that, we shouldn't necessarily do it because we're only listing the UK prices and stockists, and we are an international wine magazine. But on the other hand, I agree. I think it's so helpful for the reader.
I think
and we try to make sure that as many. So if we commission an article and we ask somebody to recommend 20 wines, we try to make sure that as many of them are possible, as many of the wines they're choosing are available. But on the other hand, again, it's a balance, because a lot of the time you'll find that some of the very exciting wines are not necessarily exported. They're not all going to be available in export markets. So sometimes if you restrict people and you say you're only allowed to recommend wines that are available over here, that really, it doesn't, then you're not portraying the true excitement of that region. And that's why sometimes there are wines in there that are, we just list the producer's website if they're not exported.
That was Amy Wislocki there, editor of Decanter. Their February issue is out now. It is a celebration of Spanish wines. And as we do every year, time to cover Japan's prestigious Stationery Awards. For its 13th edition, a whopping 1,000 nominated items were judged by 13 stationery professionals. And who best to go through the winners with me? Fiona Wilson, our Tokyo Bureau Chief and Senior Asia Editor.
Forget the Oscars and all the acting awards. This is what we're really interested in, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, you've been to Japan. The stationery shops here are just detailed beyond belief. And there's just, people love stationery here. They like the pens, the Post-its, they like the pencil cases. And of course, everyone is glued to their smartphones like they are everywhere else. But when it comes to stationery, they take it very, very seriously. So yes, I think Japan is the perfect place for these stationery awards.
And especially for this interview, I'm writing here some notes with my Pilot G-Tech C4, which I think makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about some of the winners. Well, talking about Pilot, if you don't mind that we start there, I think he got one of the awards, the Grand Award, right, with their highlighters.
That's right. Not just any award, please. I mean, to give you an idea of how much stationery is pumped out of Japan, this award, it's the 13th year of this award, and they only pick from things that have been released in the previous year. And there were 1,000 nominees. So I think you can see there's plenty of new stationery. So yes, straight to the grand prize, drum roll please. And it's a Pilot pen. I mean, Pilot pens are not expensive. They do an expensive range, but the average pen, the best bit about all this stuff is this is really accessible. We're talking about 120 yen. I mean, these things are costing €1, nothing really. And the one that won is this highlighter pen. Now, how exciting can that be? But if you care, it is quite exciting because it's got two ends, super fine highlighting. It doesn't come through the paper. It dries in a second. And it doesn't smudge whatever you're highlighting. And, they said we wanted to help students. And I can see why it won an award. And it's also got this brilliant little thing where, this is very detailed, it's got a sort of stabilizer. So when you swipe across a text with a highlighter, you can go a bit wonky. Not with this one, you won't. It steadies the tip, and it's very neat. So I think all the stationery fans love that one.
That's very helpful. We need a very good stabilizer and neat, as you said. And there's some kind of innovations here and there. One that caught my eye, I think, was Koji Jirushi kind of stamp collection. I mean, that looks amazing. There were a lot of different shapes and kind of ice cubes and, all sorts of things.
Yeah, they often do well in this award. I mean, stamping, printing is quite a big thing here. And one thing that not annoys people, but a little bit of an irritation is they're usually made from wood. So when you put the stamp onto the paper, you can't quite see where the stamp is going. And if you like multiple stamps, which people who care and make their own postcards do, you can't see where you're putting the stamp. So what they thought, let's make the stamp translucent. You can see through, you can see exactly where the stamp is going. So that got, because of course you have to remember there are awards for design, idea, functionality. And yeah, this one was a sort of popular ideas award. So, and I think it is a brilliant idea. And if you go into all the shops that we love, Itoya, this very old stationery company in Ginza, everyone's going there and they want to see what's new. So novelty is a big thing. And I thought that was quite fun as well. But yeah, it got the idea prize.
You mentioned Itoya, which is a dream. But there's so many places to buy stationery in Japan. Tokyo Hands actually is excellent on that. I mean, where do you actually go and buy your stationery, Fiona?
I'm a big Hands fan. As you know, it's very close to the Monocle office here. And you just go in, they've got everything. I mean, I'm not really buying expensive pens. What I love about all these companies in Japan like Pilot is they do a very cheap pen that really works. You don't get blotting. I just need something that I can take notes in while I'm doing an interview. And, they really work on making it, so that you can hold it, that the rubber that they encase it in is easier to grip. I mean, another one that won an award, I need to try this one. It's a Mitsubishi pencil one. And, the whole thing about this award is that it solves problems you never knew you had. And apparently people are complaining about paper slippage with some of these pens, that there's a bit of friction when you write on a bit of paper and it moves. So what Mitsubishi Pencil has done is created this pen that the light touch ink just slides onto the paper and you don't have this problem. So I'm looking for that one, and that will definitely be in hands. And it's very cheap. So it's an easy thing to try. Great souvenir if you're coming to Japan.
And one that is, a tiny bit more expensive that I really want to get is the Bandy pen case. I thought that looks stunning. That looks great. And it looks like it's made with Denning as well. It's really nice.
Yeah, that one intrigued me. So that is actually made of it's leather, but it's recycled leather. It's very, very reasonable price. It's not an expensive product. And when I read about it, I thought, it said it's responding to this sort of premium pen boom, which I have to say I wasn't wholly on top of. But apparently, a lot of schoolboys in Japan like these very expensive pens, and they want somewhere decent to store the pens. But they want to spend the money on the pens, not on the pencil case. So this was a bit of a compromise. And I love that the company who make this are called Luddite, which I think is true. They are Luddites. It's old-fashioned craftsmanship. But, I think the point is that you can have all these things. You can have the pencil case and the pens, and you can have your smartphone and work off a tablet. And I think that's probably the reality for most students who will, incidentally, you have to remember that we're coming to the end of the school year in Japan. So this is all in preparation for the start of the new school year at the beginning of April. So they time it to perfection for those brand new pencil cases on day one.
That's fantastic. And finally, Fiona, just a little, we also have a shop, of course, in Tokyo. And I'm pretty sure we sell some lovely stationery too, right?
We do. And people they come in for the notebooks. Sometimes novelty comes in the form of it not being from Japan. So sometimes people are like, they want to see what are we bringing in from overseas? What are the Germans doing in notebooks? They're interested in that sort of freshness. So yeah, we do stationery, and it's really popular. In fact, I was in the shop today and someone was just buying a Monocle notebook. So clearly a big seller.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And a little shout out to my pen of choice, Pilot's G-Tac C4. From Japan, of course. And I have some wonderful news from the Monocle world. Our brand new café and shop in Paris on the second arrondissement opened on Monday. It is open daily from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. And besides great coffee and pastries, we will also sell a nice selection of French and international titles. Monocle's Paris bureau chief, Simon Bouvier, introduces the café to us and gives us his Parisian media diet.
You wouldn't believe the amount of work that our team has been doing in the past week or so to get it up and running, but it's all looking beautiful. The paint is barely dry, but our cafe is open. We've had a bunch of customers already, curious people from the neighborhood. All of our neighbors have stopped by to say hello and introduce themselves and browse our wares. And I'm talking to you from Studio 5, our new Monocle Radio setup at the back of Monocle's outpost here. So it's all very exciting. Cafe, shop, and radio all in the same space.
And Simon, of course, this will be a space for locals, but Paris is also such an international city. So many of my friends say, Fernando, is the shop already open in Paris because I'm going to be there this weekend? So there is a kind of a sense of excitement in the city as well, right?
Absolutely. I think, you're totally right. It's always been one of the most visited cities in the world, but I think increasingly it's becoming a cosmopolitan capital. I think the French have a reputation for not speaking such good English and for being set in their ways and so on. But I really think a combination of factors, including Brexit and the rise of these giant fashion houses like LVMH and Kering and Chanel, of course, over here, have led to this being a spot where a lot of international creatives come to stay, not just to visit.
And tell us about, the street where the shop and the cafe is. Is it kind of a fairly quiet, small street? So give us kind of a sense of the place.
Yeah, so you'll have to come see for yourself.
Absolutely.
I look forward to your visit. But essentially, we're in the Montorgueil neighborhood, which historically was a way for people who would go and sell at the big grocery market at Les Halles, a little bit south of where we are, to access the huge marketplace there. But then when they moved the marketplace to the outskirts of Paris in the 20th century, they turned this neighborhood into a pedestrianized area. So it's the perfect environment for retailers and restaurateurs to thrive. You know, there's so many terraces everywhere. There's so many locals and visitors browsing the wares at the different shops. There's on Rue Montorgueil, right close to where we are, which is the main artery kind of the neighborhood. There's a pâtisserie that has been around for centuries and that invented the famous baba au rhum, this rum pastry that is now a kind of global export. It was invented right there centuries ago. So, you know, essentially it's historic Paris, but thriving in the 21st century. There's all of these up-and-coming designers and retailers that are opening shop here. Our neighbors, for example, are a concept store called Nose. They are experts in fragrances. If you walk in, they will serve you a coffee or a glass of wine if that strikes your fancy, and they will diagnose your tastes for fragrances and then make suggestions from their huge selection of over 500 different ones to find the perfect perfume for you. So you have that, and you have historic pâtisseries that have been around for centuries, all in the same neighborhood.
And coming back to the shop, I'm very excited to say that besides all the Monocle products, our books, the magazine, our lovely products, you're also going to be selling a nice edit of French and international titles. And I think this is so important, especially for me, Simone, doing the stack. You know, I'm very influenced. There's so many new titles coming out from France. I feel it's such an exciting scene. So I'm very glad that we're going to also work as a kind of a little newsstand as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, you'll see that the wall on the right when you pass through the door, is where the kiosk is, and it's entirely covered in different magazines. We've got the French National Press, of course, but then we've got independent magazines. We've got kind of better known commercial titles as well, but we've got your classics. We've got Paperboy, we've got Purple, we've got Appartamento, but we also have a selection of some of the newer French independent magazines like Beau, which this current issue of the magazine has articles about Jane Goodall and the famous Iranian BD author Marjane Satrapi in it. And we had a visit actually from the author of the A Week Abroad series of, I suppose you could call them magazines and travel guides. She popped by to admire her work being featured in the kiosk the other day. And it's basically these travel guides that allow you to immerse in the communities that you're visiting, as opposed to really looking up online, you know, what is the lowest common denominator, what is everybody into. This really allows you to get a sense of grounding in the place that you're visiting, to connect with the locals, and to really kind of be enriched by your travels. And obviously at Monocle, we share that philosophy. So when Charlène, the founder of A Week Abroad, stopped by, I was delighted to chit-chat with her and tell her, look, you know, your creations have pride of place here. Big
fan of A Week Abroad here. And I was going to ask you, Simone, what's your kind of media, or let's say magazine and newspaper diet in France? Because with so many options, I wonder if you have any favorites or something that you don't miss it for anything in this world.
So yeah, Fernando, as you say, the French national press is really a very rich ecosystem. We have generous government subsidies that allow titles from all sorts of political leanings to thrive. And we've got, as we were mentioning earlier, this kind of melting pot of creatives here that has led to a real explosion in the offerings at the French kiosks. Two things that I read every day in one case and every week in the other, since the second is a weekly, is Politico France's newsletter. They're very, very good. Their staff is all political journalists that were recruited here in Paris. So it's a global media brand that, like us, has set up shop in the French capital and is thriving. And then the other one is historic publication. It's the satirical weekly Le Canard enchaîné. It was founded in 1915. It has 8 pages, 0 ads, and their whole philosophy is that they can't be bought. So they'll poke fun at absolutely everybody, from the political class to business people. And it's not just entertaining to read, they're also extremely well informed. Some of the best informed of my colleagues in the entire French capital. So don't miss it. Full of word games and plays on words and double entendre that might be complicated for a non-native French-speaking audience to understand, but definitely one to watch. And also, from a business standpoint, a publication that has been incredibly successful thanks to the quality of its reporting and the uniqueness of its tone.
And I think you have good options there. And if I may add as well, I'm a big fan of the newspaper supplements from Le Monde, Le Magazine du Monde, which is going international now, and also Madame Figaro. I think they deliver every weekend, actually.
Definitely. And every one of these big French national papers have increasingly impressive, I think, weekly supplements. Les Échos Weekend, for example, which is the supplement of the kind of iconic French business daily, is so good on everything from culture to obviously longer features about, succession dramas within French corporations, for example. But the offering is really complete here.
Thank you very much, Simone, and can't wait to go and visit. Expect a special stack from Paris very soon. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Juras. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com or subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.